Paul, this discussion kind of made me think of another question that we actually maybe already covered a little bit before, but what happens, and this comes up because I always get called by agents and they'll say, they've hired this appraiser that doesn't even have access to our MLS, and how does that happen, and what is there any recourse? What can we do?
Well, typically the way that happens, Norm, is probably that's when an AMC, an appraisal management company, is involved, and either the group of appraisers that they have on their panel doesn't commonly serve that area, so maybe that buyer, to back up a little bit, maybe that buyer is going through a lender that just doesn't do many loans in this market area. Maybe they're moving to the area and they want to use this bank that they're
familiar with
from a previous area. So when that bank, either utilizing an AMC or just the bank directly, goes to engage an appraiser, right? The appraisers on their panel might not be from the area, right? So you may have an appraiser that accepts an assignment, right? And then calls the listing agent to set up the assignment that listing agent has never heard of before. And they may be driving some distance to do that appraisal.
I've even heard circumstances where the appraiser, when they call to make the appointment, they'll say, oh, by the way, have you got any comps for me? Because I don't have access to that MLS. It just sounds like it's counterintuitive to me, but
it is, and as an appraiser, I would have strong concerns against accepting that assignment because you have to have competency. USPAP requires that you have competency to complete the appraisal assignment in the market area for which it's assigned. And you have to have access to what is called data sources that are accessible by your peers, peer appraisers in this case, for that market area. So in this case, if the appraiser doesn't have access to the MLS data for that area, then the only way they're going to be able to get access to those sales and to that data source is through the listing agent or the realtor.
Yeah.
But it is a concern.
Yeah.
So.
And because that comes up,
and
I get that, or I've even seen situations where agents have contacted me and they say, well, they low appraised this, they used comps that weren't even close, and
most times I would argue it's because that appraiser was unfamiliar with the market area.
Yeah, and shouldn't have taken
the assignment.
Okay, so when let's just say this, at that point, let's say when that appraiser that is not normal to that area contacts the listing agent, or either one of the agents, let's say, but let's just say the listing agent. Would it be appropriate for the agent or the licensee at that point, the real estate licensee, to contact the lender and say, they don't even have access to our comps, and, can't we find another appraiser? Or?
Yeah, I think that the agent is certainly within their rights and perhaps even doing due diligence, right?
On behalf of their client.
Yeah, on behalf of their client. If they recognize that the appraiser that has received an appraisal assignment lacks competency in that market area or the required data to complete that assignment, I think that it would certainly be appropriate to contact the lender or whoever ordered the appraisal assignment. Now, there's certainly no guarantee that they're
going to change it.
Yeah, that they're going to change it, but I think that's due diligence on part of the agent.
Well, good, because that has come up, and then once before they even get the appraisal, that makes no sense. You know.
Now, in today we're primarily talking about residential,
right?
Okay, but I will say in instances where we're talking about commercial or maybe even agricultural, but commercial is the best example. Commercial appraisers oftentimes specialize in a particular area. So, I have colleagues that do hotel appraisals and strip mall appraisals and golf course appraisals. Well, if you are a golf course appraiser, let's say, that's what you specialize in commercial. There is a very good chance that you might be going all across the country to appraise golf courses. Now, that's a little bit different situation, or really a much different situation, because you specialize in the appraisal of golf courses. But also, you're not going to be asking for the listing broker for sales information on the MLS, because it would be very uncommon that we've had 4 golf course sales in our area in the last year.
Sure. Yeah. So, Paul, now that you've gotten the appraisal assignment, what do you actually do? I mean, and I know that there are differences, and we can talk about that as we get to it, but what type of loan it is, FHA, VA, conventional, rural development that we use in our area quite a bit. But what do you actually do when you go out to appraise a house? And we're talking for like a first lien mortgage loan.
Yeah, so typically we're assuming that the scope of work has said we're doing an interior inspection. So, when I go out, and there are rules that govern what we need to do at a minimum, but there's going to be a site inspection. And when I say site inspection, I mean the property that's included with the appraisal. So in some cases, that's really easy, or there's not much involved for that. For
like the land.
The land, we're talking about the land. So, if we're in a tract neighborhood or subdivision, and that's your typical lot, well, there's not much inspection to be done. There's still some. We want to know, what type of utilities are available. Are they above ground? Are they underground? Those type of things. And we call those site improvements. Is it hooked up to city sewer? Does it have a septic tank? Now, that can be much more involved on a real property with 10 acres. Most appraisers, I would think, are going to want to see the 10 acres to determine, is it a breakdown of timber? Is there any tillable cropland on it? Those type of things.
Flooding potential.
Flooding potential. And some of that we're going to get from other public sources. We're going to look at flood maps. We're going to look at the GIS or the aerial view. But then certainly we want to focus on the building improvements. And when I say building improvements, on a residential appraisal, of course that includes the house, right? But then any other structures that are on the property as well. So outbuildings, detached garages, barns, sheds, any of those type of things. In-ground pools, right? The appraiser should measure those structures as well. So that's where one of the oftentimes biggest differences between MLS data and even public data can come in. So the appraiser is going to measure the house and any other structure that's on the property. And most appraisers are going to use ANSI measuring standards.
What is that?
So ANSI standards, it's a measuring standard that says how are you supposed to measure? Because we can measure
from the appraisals world.
From the appraiser's world. And so typically that's from the exterior.
Right.
Okay? But that might be quite different than how somebody else would measure. Maybe they would measure from the interior, right? Well, just even in that case, and I want to make a clarification here too, I am talking about for single-family detached homes.
Correct, yes.
ANSI standards for measuring a condo, because I know some of the viewers of this may work in areas where there are condominiums. Appraisers measure from the inside. Why the difference? Well, if you're a condo on the 21st floor, I can't measure that from the outside. So
sure you can.
Yeah.
You can also watch the windows while you're out there.
Yeah, while I'm out there, sure. So, but that's ANSI measuring standards.
Well, the other thing that comes into that is, and we've dealt with this with MLS data forever and ever, is ANSI has a different standard for measuring finished square footage than maybe we do when we list it and we're selling it.
Correct.
So in other words, I know typically in a lot of markets, especially around waterfronts and things like that, you may have what appears to be a single story on the front, where the front approach, but then toward the water or the lake property, let's say, you may have a walkout, completely walkout underneath, totally finished. And so what is the standard from an ANSI standpoint? I mean, so let's just say you have 1,500 square feet on the main floor, and then you have 1,500 square feet underneath with a big walkout, all finished.
Right.
We're going to say that's a 3,000 square foot home.
Right.
Okay, so what does
the
ANSI
appraiser?
do? Yeah, what's the
Yeah,
appraiser do with that?
So the appraiser, first of all, there is some language that allows the appraiser a little bit of discretion for what is common for the market area. But for our market area and for what is typically expected for ANSI measurements for us, it is anything that is above the front door stoop, at the level of the front door stoop or above, right? That is what we call above grade square footage, or GLA. And anything that is below that front door stoop is below grade square footage, or we can call that the basement, right? And it's not included in GLA. And those are valued separately. It's not saying, again, it depends on the market area, it's not saying that it's worth any less. In some instances, it could be worth more, right? But it is treated differently. The other item that I
know that we had some real discussions with appraisers in our area over, that very thing. The realtor's going to list it as 3,000 square feet of GLA.
Yep.
And then the appraisers were all going, "Oh, that's wrong.
It's only
that's
1,500.
wrong. It's only 1,500." And of course, our MLS systems are all set up online where people do searches, and they're going to say, "I want at least 2,500 square feet, blah blah blah," and all of a sudden they're not going to list that home at 1,500 square feet.
Right. The other examples that I can think of where that comes into play all the time is with split levels, bi-levels, and tri-level homes, right? And then also you had mentioned with ANSI measuring standards, the typically accepted standard for second floor story height is 7 foot or above, right? Well, you know that in many bungalows and many older homes, they may
story and a half.
Yeah, story and a half. So they may not have 7 foot anywhere.
Right.
In the second story. So
or if it's a sloped roof and those kind of things where it peaks.
Yeah, so most appraisers, because of what's acceptable to that market area, are going to measure from about a 7 foot working height. Well, as a result, in your bungalow, if you get that appraisal report and you look at the sketch, you might think the appraiser is crazy because they said, well, they're saying that my second story is only 8 foot wide. It's the entire width of the house. Well, again, it's because of that ANSI measuring standard of a 7 foot working height.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's kind of a little sidebar, but I know that those issues come up on how you measure a house, and it just from having been an MLS administrator and an executive officer for a local MLS, it's tough to try to balance all of that, and the appraisers use our data too.
Right.
They need it as well.
It certainly is a challenge, for associations that are trying to provide good quality data for all participants. And in this case, those participants are, yes, primarily the realtor, right? But also the appraisers who are members of the MLS and the subgroup, because we know that MLSs today are the primary feeders of the Realtor.coms, the Zillows, third-party websites. And so trying to accurately represent that data so that all parties who use those services can get data out of it. Now, you also asked, some other things going back to what should that what should that client expect when the appraiser's at their home? To go back to that a little bit. If the listing agent or the seller is there, I expect that appraiser should ask a lot of questions, about improvements of the home, about just the home in general, what has been done. I would expect that appraiser, if it's me, is going to take lots of notes. And also, even though most realtors tell their clients this, but do expect that appraiser is going to take a lot of pictures. They're required for the appraisal report. And by pictures, it's not only exterior pictures of the home, but it's interior pictures as well. Now, most appraisers are not going to take pictures inside your closets, right? But they're going to be photographing your bedrooms, bathrooms, and living areas.
So make the bed that day.
So yeah, you ought to make the bed that day. Now, while a lot of people aren't going to see it, but just as a comfort proposition, I would suggest picking your dirty clothes up off the floor and making your bed at well.
But that's all a part of your evaluating quality, condition. And, we talked about this before too, but if the good appraiser is, I guess, what I'm going to qualify that as, they may ask that homeowner or that listing agent, oh, it looks like, the furnace is relatively new. Do you have any information on when it was replaced?
Yep.
And those kind of things.
That's a really great point, Norm, because a lot of times if I walk into a home, you can look at a furnace and kind of tell it's new, but the question I always ask our new appraisers coming in the business is, well, what's a new furnace look like? Because a lot of times, if those are in a utility or closet or something like that, whether a furnace is brand new or it's 5 years old, it still looks about the same.
Well, and on some you could, and I don't know if it's required, but you can look
That
on the
tag.
serial number tag, and a lot of times they'll have a date of manufacturer
It's
on it
true.
and those kind of things.
It's
So,
true, but know that for our realtors too, because we encourage our realtors to look at those too. But oftentimes that data manufacturer does not. We know that doesn't coordinate to when it was installed. So, for
Right.
instance,
Could have been in a warehouse for a year.
could have been in the warehouse for a while. That's true with furnaces, hot water heaters, air
All that.
conditioners,
Right.
appliances. You got it.
So
yep.
that's and the other thing, and I'm sure that always comes into this equation is your evaluation of not only that property but how it coordinates with the rest of the neighborhood.
Yeah, just like with real estate, the most important factors oftentimes are location, location, and location. And that is certainly true with the appraisal as well. We are evaluating the location of that property's features, the quality, the condition of that property. Those are just a few of the items that the appraiser needs to gather and needs to determine to develop a credible appraisal report.
Yeah. Well, and now that you've gone out, you've done your inspection, you've done your measurements, you've done all of that, and I guess we'll touch on, the differences between FHA and VA a little bit later, but now that you've done that, you've taken all your data, you've made your notes, you go back and you start looking for what we call comparable sales. So what is a comparable sale?
Yeah, so the goal, and we're going to talk about in a perfect world for residential appraisals right now, if we're looking at a 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch with a 2-car attached garage we're going to call it in Sunnydale subdivision. Well, the ideal situation would be if the neighbor's home, which is the exact same size.
Or 3 or 4.
Yeah, or 3 or 4.
of
The
those.
neighbor's home, the one across the street, and the one street over are all 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranches, 2-car attached garage.
Same lot size.
Same lot size, built the same year. That is the appraiser's dream. That is an easy appraisal assignment. We're looking for, usually at a minimum, for secondary market transactions. Again, we need 3 closed sales that have sold in an acceptable time frame. And in our rural area, that's the past 12 months. So that's what we're looking at, is for those, if in the perfect world, we could find that same cookie cutter home. But we know oftentimes that doesn't happen.
Right.
So instead, we look for homes that have similar, what the appraiser calls, functional utility. So that is, we can think of that in terms of bedrooms, bathrooms, size, I need a place to park my car, it's an attached garage. So we're going to start expanding. Maybe it's a little bigger or smaller. Maybe it's located in a different neighborhood than what the subject was. Maybe it's older or newer than the subject. So those are what we're looking for in comparable sales, but really we want to look for comparable properties that are as close to the subject as possible.
Okay, that brings up the question, do you also research and try to find active properties or withdrawns or expired?
Yep. So certainly,
because we preach that on the CMA side.
Absolutely. So on the appraiser's side, to be honest, we're always focusing first on sold properties.
Sure, and
right?
I think we are
because
in
that's
CMAs,
required.
yeah.
That's required. The second would be pending, right? Because these are things that we're at least presuming are going to close, assuming all things go well, but pendings and actives. Now on the expired or temp off markets, typically not as much, but certainly depending on the availability of data, that's something that could be considered as well. The active and pending properties are really important to look at as well, because that shows that this property that we're appraising, a lot of times, let's say if it's for a sale, those active and pending properties are that property's current competition, right? So what was it stacked
Or
up
maybe
against in the
value.
market? Yeah, and so that's really a help in determination of value.
The other thing too is, do you evaluate days on market, especially on solds or pendings? You know, how long was it on the market, or even on an active? You know, if you've got an active that, okay, that one's priced 20,000 higher than everything else, and now it's been on the market for 190 days. That kind of tells, it's probably
tells us
overpriced.
something. Yeah.
It's overpriced.
So days on market, again, it depends on the market area, but days on market is a great indicator, you know. And most modern MLSs show you things like price reductions, you know, and when they happened. That can also tell a story as to why something has been on the market for the time period it was. Now that might be, you know, if we see a sale that was only on the market for 4 or 5 days, you know, maybe it was underpriced.
Yeah.
Right?
It worked the other way.
Yeah, it works the other way. So
you know, the other thing is too, and I think most appraisers at this point have access to the entire data set from most MLSs. Now, in the past, it was, you know, they would get the sold books or whatever, and I think there are still some MLSs that they have 2 levels of service for appraisers. One with just sold information and others, but I think that that active and that pending and those things that have not closed are just as important to me, and it actually is a good market indicator to me.
And some lenders, quite frankly, they require the inclusion of at least 2 or 3
Actives.
or 1 active or pending sales
Yeah.
to be included in that appraisal report.